Welcome to Chapter 2 of Abnormal Psychology. We're going to be looking at the historical and contemporary views of abnormal behavior through the ages. We're going to begin with some of the historical views of abnormal behavior. We had some ancient treatments. During the Stone Age, we would see them chiseling away parts of the skull. And then during the Egyptian times, they began using surgery and prayers to deal with the behavior that they did not understand. We also saw a lot of mental illness being attributed to demonology, to gods, and magic. Many of them believed that the abnormal behavior was due to being possessed by good or evil spirits or being punished by an angry god. Hippocrates was one of the first who came in and gave us the idea that perhaps mental disorders had natural causes. He categorized disorders as mania, melancholia, and phrenitis, and these were based on the four humors in the body. One thing that he did contribute was the beginning of some categorizing of the disorders. He also linked the occurrence of dreams with the personality, that perhaps during the dreams a person was exhibiting some parts of their personality that were at an unconscious level. Early on, like I said, mental illness was very misunderstood. It was feared. People did not know what to do. So a lot of times, those who were mentally ill would be placed in asylums, and these were basically just large warehouses where people were kept in cages, even to a point where some asylums charged an entrance fee, and people would just walk through to kind of look at and gawk at those who were mentally ill. But in France, Philippe Pinel was one of the first who began trying to treat the mentally ill in a more humanitarian way. He got them out of their chains. He put them into bright, sunny rooms, gave them an opportunity to exercise, and he actually saw some positive results from this treatment. This passed on or was carried on to England, where William Tuke actually set up some countryside estates where the mentally ill would be housed, and again, they were treated in a more humane way. This carried over to America, and the two main people that we associate with this would be Benjamin Rush and Dorothy Dix. Dorothy Dix is known for really lobbying Congress and being involved in government to try to get better treatment for those who were mentally ill. She is most closely associated with the moral hygiene movement. During the 40s, most mental hospitals continued to be inhumane and ineffective, even though there were some reforms taking place. In 1946, we saw the development of the National Institute of Mental Health. This organization was developed to advocate for research and treatment of those who were mentally ill. In 1963, we had the Community Health Services Act, and this was the development of some outpatient clinics and different services so that those who were mentally ill could be let out of institutions. As we look at the emergence of contemporary views of abnormal behavior, we'll see some recent changes. First, there's been quite a few biological discoveries. As we've increased research, we've been able to study the brain and different parts of the body and discover some of the areas that are related to mental illness. There's also been the development of mental disorders classification system. As I mentioned in chapter 1, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual helps us as we classify and diagnose mental disorders. There's also been the emergence of psychological causation views. As we go through this course, you're going to see that there are many, many different opinions and ideas about the causes of psychological issues. And then we've also seen more experimental psychological research. And again, the more we look into it and the more we research, the more we learn, and that leads to better developments in treatment plans, pharmaceuticals, and things to help those who suffer with mental illness. As we look at the development of the psychological basis of mental disorders, one of the first things we see is mesmerism. This is the idea that diseases can be treated by animal magnetism, and this has been a very controversial issue. It was a source of heated discussion in early 19th century, and mesmerism actually ended up being rejected in Europe, but it was embraced in the United States. Then we had Sigmund Freud come on the scene. He's probably one of the most well known in the field of psychological research and mental health issues. He took some of the first major steps towards understanding the psychological factors in mental disorders. He is credited with developing the psychoanalytical perspective, and this perspective really emphasizes the inner dynamics of the unconscious motives that a person has and shows when they are mentally ill. As we look at psychoanalysis, some of the main tenets of this theory are the ideas of catharsis, looking at the unconscious, using free association, and doing dream analysis. Then we have the behavioral perspective, and under the behavioral perspective, we have classical conditioning and operant conditioning. The two theorists that are associated with classical conditioning are Ivan Pavlov and John Watson. You may be familiar with Pavlov, or you've heard of Pavlov's dog. And in classical conditioning, what Ivan Pavlov did was he paired a stimulus, which was the ringing of the bell, with the presentation of food, which led to the response of the dog salivating. So when he would ring the bell, he would then give the dog the food. The dog would salivate in response to the food. Eventually, he discovered that he was able to ring the bell and not present the food, and the dog would still salivate because he had been conditioned to anticipate the presentation of the food when he heard the bell ring. Then with operant conditioning, we have E.L. Thorndike and B.F. Skinner, and their research and study into conditioning dealt more with consequences, whether a person received negative consequences or positive consequences for their actions directly determined the reinforcement of that behavior. So a lot of times we'll look at Skinner when we're looking at discipline or classroom management and the presentation of reinforcers.